Next off is spec A, interpretation. The app should specify which communist event they are fidelis to. Violation, they don't. It's reason to vote neg. There are countless attempts to communism throughout history, and they differ in important ways. We are prepared to say now and pull pop app, but the way C can shift depending on the R1 and C, which structurally favors the affirmative. It makes negative pre-round meaningless, and it is inauthentic, but specifies historical events in his theory of them. They manipulate for an easy app valid turns fidelity, and no counter advocacy. The advocacy is intentionally written vaguely despite kind of alternative competition stories, and if the event has not happened, it is impossible to predict, and there's no literature on it, which makes their argument tautological, means you vote negative presumption because it's non-falsifiable. All the reasons above are voters for education and competitive equity. And next off, we advocate fidelity to an event of communism without counting white supremacists. Universal single-payer empowers the alt-right. It allows Trump to provide a service to the white working class without requiring them to engage in means tested programs that are inevitably racialized and stigmatized. That's Matthews. And 17, all rights and other Trump loyal conservatives all enjoys various models of single-payer. Welfare state expansion can be accommodated if it serves building a political base among working white class. Republicans will become a party of economic nationalists, growing to treat Americans better than non-Americans. Single-payer would serve white people and encourage the growth of the alt-right movements. Alt-right governments can use the power to promote a more vigorous, healthy white race on the number of dimensions. Single-payer universality is appealing because it helps the white working class without making them a rural means-tested programs traditionally associated with black and Latino beneficiaries. Next off is Zizek. Badu's notion of political subtraction is indistinguishable from postmodern micropolitics. Reading his theory and capable of challenging the coordinates of global capitalism, he renaturalizes capitalism as his ideological background in politics. His fear of the cultural evolution drives his theory of the event into the ground that Zizek. And 8, the attack should normally be performed by critical political activity is already been performed by capitalism itself. The system no longer excludes the excess but directly posited as striving for capitalism can only reproduce itself through its constant self-revolutionizing. The order and task building the new world is kind of a return to the repressed cultural revolution, holds the same structural place the Nazi revolution did for Heidegger, that of the most radical political engagement whose failure signals the end of the traditional mode of political engagement. As such, Badu's resolution is distant from the state form, not an opposite of that is destructive of the state form, rather a gesturing of subtracting oneself from the state. Is then the alternative is simply to accept that the state as a fact and operate at a distance toward to call the established order to better attenuate its malicious effect. Are we not abandoning the field all too easily to the enemy? Badu reads the demise of communism at the universal level. Badu seems to lack meta theory of history. Badu relegated capitalism to the naturalized background over historical constellation capitalism as worldless. The crucial question to be asked is thus, to what extent critique of capitalism foreclosed by the current configuration of oppositional politics when the notion of universal historicity and contingency is part of the hegemonic ideology? One should rather turn the ideological perspective upside down and ask, what is that or remains the same in the most celebrated nomadic dynamism of contemporary society? The answer, capitalism. That which remains the same is the very constellation which instigates the incessant change, since the deepest feature of capitalism is its dynamic permanent self-revolutionizing. If we were to enact a truly radical change and change the capitalist relations themselves, that would precisely cut the roots from under the incessant social dynamic of capitalist life and reject the affirmative as an instance of capitalism. This creates an ideological break from the system. Theoretical rejection is a prerequisite to the act or any successful practice that's Johnson and Ford. No worthwhile practice can emerge prior to the careful and deliberate formulation of a correct conceptual framework of the contemporary exhaustion, the socio-political imagination, the hegemony of liberal democratic capitalism, liberation of thinking itself from its present constraint must be taken. If anything is to be changed for the better, the philosophers have only interpreted the world. The point is to change it. One must resist succumbing to the temptation to short-circuit thinking in favor of acting. Genuine materialist embraces the taking of first with no guarantee whatsoever of a subsequent good result. The specter of totalitarianism is evoked so as to silence demands for taking chances by intellectually entertaining possibilities, pronounce impermissible capitalist democracy, market democracy. Next off is Nietzsche. No truth, vote negative on presumption. Their attempt to produce truth is a trick of language. That's Nietzsche. In 87, a quantum force such as quantum movement is nothing else than just those phenomenon of movement can only appear otherwise the misleading errors of language which understands wrongly all the workings as conditioned by his subject exactly as the people separate from the lightning from its flash also does. Morality separates strength from the expression of strength out through beyond the strength man there exists some neutral substratum. There is no being behind doing. The action is everything. Our whole science is a dupe of tricks of language. When the oppressed say let us be otherwise be evil, namely good, this kind of man finds belief in a neutral free choosing subject to necessary from an instinct of self-preservation in which every life is fain to sanctify itself. On to case proposition 1, we have a right to multiple propositional attacks against Badu's metaphysics and ethics of the event. A, the one he sees ethical evaluation and purpose on metaphysical understanding of the event, the subject and the object. This means we are having a metaphysics first debate. B, Badu's ethics make little sense without his metaphysics. They should concede this. C, they made this illogical by evoking mathematical ontologies. This means if the app is anything like the novelty of events, we are now expressing fidelity to the event of the one he sees called a dialogue. D, shifting out of Badu's event is a voted for being unfair, creating an unbalance on the ground, makes the app-side bias now a moving target. It's also not very ethical for what it's worth. Proposition 2, don't be fooled by their appeals to universal truth. Badu can't account for race or colonialism. That's Paquette. And 17, Badu individually seeks to be able to designate neg, whether something counts as political, whether it counts as emancipation, Badiou neglects to incorporate race into colonial theories, thus failing to expand to involve the formulation of political theory. This position is far more problematic because it assumes that a political theory can incorporate or discern what is true of all political emancipatory movements while being firmly European. Proposition 3, Badiou's ontology is based on flawed mathematics. The existence of an empty set follows from the results in first order logic and the application of the Cervello-Frankel axioms. Badiou's ontology is the equivalent of drawing a triangle in black pen and assuming that all triangles must be black, even though we chose to draw the triangle in black. We don't do math and debate very often for a reason. We can offer a proof consistent with a rigorously designed set of axioms and disprove the basic assumption of Badiou's ontology. That's Nuremberg and Nuremberg and 11. Badiou proceeds to postulate the existence of the empty set. Out of nothing, the whole cosmos will be created. There is nothing necessary about this origin ex nihilo to assume the existence of the empty set as an axiom is merely a technically convenient choice in logical kinematics, which logically precedes the Cervello-Frankel axiom of set theory. The existence of set A is guaranteed. There's a set X is axiomatic rather than there is an empty set market. Empty set proposition 4. Even if they're right about their ethics are still bad. A. Badiou wrongly universalizes, destroys any chance for a successful alternative. That Frostberg and 1. The critique is overgeneralization. Badiou leaves out the possibility that a human being can be reduced precisely to the status of the victim. The problem with universality returns and ignoring questions of cultural dissonance. How can we differentiate between the sameness of truth and the homogeneity improved by capitalist modification? Badiou's disposal of cultural difference suggests the intimity of the universal in particular as much as symptom of the post-Cold War historical moment as a problem-solvable history. B. Badiou's theory of political events justifies Nazism. That's McKinsey and 8. Badiou says that equality means that the political actors represent another soul sign of a uniquely human capacity. That thought is the one of the only uniquely human capacity. Badiou says the equality signifies nothing. Objective political equality is not whether what we desire or plan. Badiou is eschewing any conception of equality. These two claims are in conflict with each other. The former being a version of human capacity argument for equality. The latter would seem to deny any validity to arguments in support of any particular equality of all. A purely formal conception of equality would be no more than an empty tautology, market tautology. Proposition 5. Badiou's system fails. He has no way to overcome the enormous power he attributes to capitalism. That's Brown and 4. But he maintains his distance from the economic capitals. Great part of the tremendous ease which it colonized the territory is precisely that it sees the situations at their eventual site. Capitalism itself fits perfectly the form of revolutionary fit. Capitalism is eliminated from the arts, politics, science, love series only by fiat. Market fiat.
Cross-X?
Yeah.
Let's start on case this math argument. It says that we assume the empty set as axioms.
Yeah.
Why is assuming an axiom in mathematics
Okay.
bad or evitable?
So basically what happens is first order logic assumes the existence of something, and then you have the Cervello-Frankel axioms, which is what Badiou bases his ontology on, right? And Badiou says the axiom, which is a convenient choice, i.e. that there is an empty set, is how he builds his ontology, right? Everything comes from nothing. But instead, first order logic says there is something, A, and then from A we can build nothing from the separation axiom, saying A is not equal to B.
Equally as convenient?
Why? Because first order logic, we can suppose something exists, and first order logic comes from, like, I guess
I
you could say.
understand that first order logic. Well, actually, whatever.
Yeah, sure.
Let's ask a different question. Nietzsche, where does this card say that there is no truth?
The evidence indicates that the kind of notion that we can create truth subjectively is like an error of language.
Okay, where does the app create truth subjectively?
It indicates that your fidelity, or what you call truth procedure, is one that actually is grounded more so in the human institution of language and a kind of subjective creation that humans have established, rather than it is in some sort of objective capital T truth. Our mathematics and ontology arguments that disprove the mathematical basis by which Badiou is able to deduce that there is a truth also substantiate this argument as well, which is the impact to those math arguments on case.
That's fine. Let's talk about Zizek. Why is a universal level reading of communism bad?
Our evidence indicates that his universalization ignores the way in which communist or capitalist ideology kind of perniciously inserts itself into micro-political movements, such that we can presuppose a false universality whereby the bourgeoisie is also incorporated into the universal, or the white supremacist is also incorporated into the universal. Everyone is counted.
I have a question about
and
that.
The problem with that is it doesn't allow us to know who's kind of our enemies and who's our friends.
Why is making the distinction between friends and enemies important?
Our evidence indicates that the way by which one is able to kind of conduct like a Leninist revolution or enact a change within society that can bring about a benevolent world is by determining what is bad and what's not bad. And and like the question in the first cross-section, I think of instances.
But why is a Leninist revolution good?
Because our evidence indicates the only way by which we are able to change society is by enacting things rather than just having fidelity towards the status quo because it's ethical.
Okay, fidelity towards the status quo. that's fine. What is the basis, the white supremacist pick, what is the basis on which it's acceptable to uncount a person? And why are white supremacists the ones that get uncounted?
Our evidence indicates that white supremacists not only are violent, but it's precisely
So anyone who's
because
violent, we can just say they don't count.
not just violent, but their ideology is one that discounts others in a way that is fundamentally inequitable.
You have 10 minutes, right? The order will be case, framework, the spec argument, the pick, the Zizek K, and the Nietzsche K. going to be the case, the framework page, the spec argument, the pick, the Zizek game, and then the Nietzsche argument.
So Nietzsche arguments. That was a lightning strike.
Anyone not ready? We have made a claim about being with a capital B. This is not the particular type of being you encounter in everyday experience, but the quality by which everything comes to exist. Its most essential property is that it is multiple. Every time we experience change, that's phenomenological proof that being must be many as opposed to one. If being is constant revelation of what is new, for that newness to become historically structured, you must become universally imported. Neither postmodern relativism nor ontological absolutism represent new theories. Instead, they repeat the violence of the status quo. Therefore, at the junction of the new, we have to have faith in a radical rupture away from the status quo. We must have fidelity to the event of communism. That is the ethics of truth. 2 reasons to vote F. 1, ethics. We're the only team that provided you a system of doing ethics, which means that you have to default to F until the negative provides a commuting one. Without ethics, you can't determine what actions are worth taking, what impacts matter, and what your role is. So it's an a priori issue. Second, nihilism and immortality. The F is key to avoiding nihilism, which is the incapacity to strive for good and eliminates value to anything. That justifies Nazism and genocide. Instead, through fidelity, we're convicted by something greater than our individual selves and make an object change in the world. A big part of that change is how we participate in the process of being and being counted. That allows our subjects to continue existing after biological deaths. On the first proposition, they are wrong about Badou's metaphysics. Ethics is the ground and the transcendental condition of being. That was the analysis above. And Badou's central question is, what does it mean to be counted? The metaphysics debate is going to get weird and mathy, but the overall framing question has to be ethics first. If you agree that we have to count more people in this stated situation and the violence of domination comes about as a result of not counting, then you should vote for the affirmative. It's their burden to demonstrate that being wrong about the metaphysics produces an unethical result in order for it to be offense. Being wrong about the metaphysics doesn't mean the act doesn't have the ability to produce something good, so there's no presumption vote here. They say the Packard evidence says Badou can't account for race, but we do. We would say that racial violence and colonialism comes about as a result of not counting certain people. This is uniquely important because they have not provided a counter theory for how racism and colonialism actually happen, so you have to default to the affirmative conception. We would say that by not counting someone as human, you are able to do violence to them. Next, they say this math argument, but the Gödel's incompleteness theorem means that every single form of mathematics is always going to be formed on some sort of axiom. There's no self-consistent axiom that will always work, which means that every single axiom chosen is always going to be one that is convenient for you. There's also no impact to this case, and I bet you in a gut check they cannot explain any of the math shit, so probably don't buy it as any offense. Let's go to the next proposition. They say to universalize. We're going to internally turn this. We would say that the event must be general because the common sense of the way we come into understanding the phenomena that we experience is necessarily key. We would say that the situation is a general thing that includes everyone, and only the event is able to turn all that. They make this Mackenzie argument, but Badou's understanding of an event doesn't justify Nazism because the principles of Nazism cannot equally be claimed by all. Their author, Mackenzie, 8. An occurrence cannot be grasped. It can be grasped a true event if everybody could claim fidelity to the significance of the occurrence by universalizable. Badou means that the event is equally claimed by all in the way he distinguishes pseudo-reactionary events as Nazism from real events of the ground. Those ideals of Nazism cannot be claimed equally by all. The meaning of Jew is a meaning no one can share with Nazi. Hence the singularity of Nazism. The rise of Nazism described as simulacrum. A political event is only by fidelity to an event can be universalized, and when the addresses us all as equals, then one can talk about a true event. And proposition 5, they say we can't overcome cap, but if we're winning the logic of the event, then it necessarily can be overcome. The event is that which ruptures the situation as it is, so it's able to stop it. And also, the second part of the overview indicates that even if we can't stop capitalism, it is unethical to be against. It is ethical. It is ethical. What?
The third sequence stuff.
Oh, yeah, I'll get to that on the spec part. Yeah, let's go to the framework page. Oh yeah, at the bottom, sorry. Even if they end up winning these metaphysical claims, it's all defense, and it won't be a reason to vote by the end. Let's go to the framework page. 1, we meet every year the resolution names what does and does not count as an F. Every instance is beyond our plan is the counting of a new utopia, since every event is constituted by things inside the situation that refuse to count. We therefore operate from within the parametric of debate. It's impossible for an event to come from the outside of the situation. There is no heaven of truth. An event is the imminent break within a situation that radically reorganizes things, how things are counted within it. That's Badou. So our core objection to the framework is ethical. It's who we think we are. What we're up to in policy debate, it's about conviction, our norms, or ethics. You can't not vote F, even if there is a topical F, until we become the kind of community where it's in bad taste or unthinkable to respond to a justice F at the decon dissent. You have to affirm the affirmative until it is unthinkable that's the way the community would respond to a demand for justice. This is the only F we can proclaim. That's our positive vision of debate. 2, counter-interpretation. Whoever has the best relation to the event should win. Reasons for A, ethics. Ethics is the only thing that matters. That was done above. B, better for debate. Debate is fundamentally a truth-seeking process. That means the framework debate is always about who provides the best method for uncovering truth. Hallward and Badou say that the only way to affirm affirm truth is through fidelity to the event that outweighs their education fairness standards. We also give actual debates over the resolutions that have trivial Asian comparison. So we solve better. 3 is the education term that turns their education standard. The 1 is fidelity to the event opens up limitless possibilities for understanding the truths of healthcare and the situation of favor. While the negatives limiting of healthcare debate to the status quo divorces us from encountering any new truth. That's the hallword and Purdue evidence. 4, they succumb to the 3 evils of temptation and hallword. I'm just going to go for betrayal here. Their attempt to absolutely impose a model of debate is a corruption of fidelity to the event of resolution. This is the evil of betrayal. They seek to deny the event because of an attachment to the status quo, making the real process of truth impossible, turning their education standards. They turn debate into a universal search for universal truth about a plan, divorcing truth, seeking for the rhetorical process of the subject's relationship to the event that justifies upholding the status quo at all costs because all truth they seek to enforce about policy making fall apart in the world of the affirmative. Next is the statism to set. The state is bad. Dead destroys the subject by insisting the flaws and excessive power of the state are not integral to its existence. They refuse to count the pure multiple upon the exclusion of which the state enacts access fine. Solvency requires rupturing the state, which means no TV or list of topical apps. Zizek, 98. Situation is concept of consistent multiple structure allows it to count it as one in order for a situation to be counted as one. Structure must always be already involved in a meta structure which designates it as one. There's no state solvency without a state in which structure of society is represented. The pure multiple being is not a multitude of one. To have one, the pure multiple must be counted as one from the standpoint of the state. The preceding multiple can only appear as nothing. Each state of things involves and at least one excessive element which through clearly belonging to the situation not counted by a part.
Let's go to the next page.
Okay, let's go to the next page. Let's go to the spec argument. We meet our second piece of Purdue evidence indicates that we are the third stage of the communist hypothesis, which is distinct from the first stage, which was the Paris Commune, and the second stage, which is the Marxist-Leninist poverty state and the welfare state. We specify this in the 1AC, so there's no reason why our none of their often says that the advocacy must specify that. As long as we specify it in our solvency advocate, that should be enough. They say communist attempts at communism. We are not that. We are not the. We say we are an experimental move away from the old forms of communism. Sure, we can't say exactly what that is, but the affirmative is an experiment that moves towards it. It's not inauthentic because Purdue himself says that it must be. It must be good. They can do counter-advocacies. They can say that the old historical forms are better. They can say Stalinism and Leninism are good. And they literally did do that on the Zizek case, so there's no ground loss. Let's go to the pick. Permanently, but the counterplan isn't functionally competitive with the affirmative. They remove a single practice from healthcare that is a minor part of the entire healthcare system, which is not substantially competitive with the app. It's not a reason you vote for the pick. Also, we don't advocate for single payer, so there's no link here. And the counterplan to be both textually and functionally competitive. That's the only logical standard. Textual competition alone isn't enough. Always plan plus by delimiting the action of the plan. Forces us to stop debating about the effectiveness of the plan, which is bad for education. Justifies permutation to the counterplan because it justifies counterplans like do the plan in the entire world, not just the United States. It also justifies an infinite amount of tiny word picks, which make it impossible to be the affirmative. Functional competitiveness alone justifies an infinite number of tiny processes and counterplans or infinite number of picks out of bits and pieces of normal means. That begs the question of the standards above. Also, there's a solvency deficit here. Our ethic arguments indicate that we need to count everyone, whisking away a group of people because they're bad. It's the logic of the alt-right themselves that they wish to exclude. That was the explanation of the ethics star case. The most ethical decisions are often the most difficult ones, and it's a betrayal and bad faith to make the argument that our plan can be made marginally better by just excluding one group. What should count is everyone. They should count as exactly the same, which is as one, and their standard for what counts as someone to be excluded is absolute nonsense. And cross-sects, they're just like, these people are violent. If you, this is the same logic that the conservatives will use to be like, oh, Black Lives Matter is violent, so we should not give them healthcare. We should not give them access to shit. Let's go to the Zizek, the Kapke. They say, first off, perm do both. There's no reason why we can't engage. We can't look at different methodologies for combating capitalism as long as we believe in a context of the event. Also, perm to the alternative. We were always already a method against capitalism. Next day, the third wave stuff in the Purdue the second piece of Purdue evidence indicates that we actually solved the problem for the Zizek card. Zizek's main problem is that the old forms the end of history has come as per Fukuyama, which means that the old forms are never going to be working, and this is Zizek's main problem with this, which means that only our experimental move away from the old forms of communism that reinvigorate anti-capitalist movements is a good one. Also, Leninism is dead. Our Purdue evidence indicates that that was the second wave of the communist hypothesis, so it's not going to be enough. Let's go to the Nietzsche stuff. The Hallward evidence indicates that we don't believe in some sort of universal truth out there like Plato. Instead, we believe that truth is a process that gets invigorated when we do things and engage rhetorically. That's our Daniels evidence. This is nonsense because nothing in this card has an impact, nor does it make any sort of argument about how there actually is no truth. You should read this piece of evidence and you should force them to explain it. Also, Hallward internal link turns this stuff. We don't return to the slave morality like Nietzsche says we would under our form of truth.
Can we take second prep?
Yeah.
12 seconds, please.
Okay.
All right, let's start on the case page. So we start out with being with capital B, but then we move to our math stuff and talk about how everything is sort of contingent. How are these two things consistent?
That's not what the math argument is. The math argument was an argument purely in the set of math. Gödel, who is a mathematician in Austria, did a set of proof which indicated that there is no set of self-consistent axioms that can always describe all of mathematics. There were some people who were trying to do that. Gödel proved that that's impossible. We would say that means that any mathematical system must always pick and choose which axioms to begin with.
Okay, sure. So how is, what system of axioms both prove and don't prove Badou's ontology then?
What does that mean?
Like,
we would say that
which
you have
ones
to
are
start
using?
with an axiom that you pick with.
I mean, if we prove it's inconsistent with the axioms that Badou actually uses, the Zermelo-Frankel axioms, then isn't that sufficient to prove that it's a bad idea?
One, I don't think you
not
have
consistent
proven
with those axioms.
As per your own evidence, you have not proven that Zermelo-Franco set theory is not legitimate. Also, the only standard you set out in the last cross-ex is that you must begin with a positive thing in first-order logic. Badou would indicate that the empty set is a positive affirmation. You can posit that there is such a thing as an empty set.
Okay.
It's not like there is a nothing that we begin with, but rather a positive affirmation of a set that is empty.
Sure, all right, that's fine. Let's move on to kind of the top of this argument that we have to disprove more than just the ontology, that the ethics are different from them. Then how are we drawing this difference between the ethics and the ontology?
Well, I think that Daniel's evidence gives a really good material example of Badou's ethics in work. In Tunisia, there was a man named Mohamed Bouazizi who was destroyed by the economic situation. He was unemployed, he was a street vendor, he had his vendor cart taken away from him. In an act of radical faith, he lit himself on fire in an act of self-immolation, and that sparked the revolution in Tunisia. We would say that the belief that those people like Mohamed Bouazizi, should be counted in the situation, and they are not counted by neoliberalism now, is an ethical thing.
Then why are we including them at the level of theory? Like, that's our second, our second proposition, is that decolonial theory itself is not involved, right? That it's not, that Badou's advocacy isn't informed by these other forms of theory. It's just a European idea of what the event is. How can we include that person without including those ideas?
I think you would have to make the argument that those ideas necessarily shape those people. I don't think you have made that argument. The argument is that the argument made at the overview is that what being really is pure multiplicity. Every time we experience something different, we experience phenomenological change, that is proof that our being is always going to be one of change and multiplicity. We would say that every person, right, regardless of their historical situation, is part of that being.
So this argument,
and as such, we should count them all.
This argument that the logic can overcome capitalists by being fidelis to the event, how do we do this if we don't have like an outline of how this actually happens, as opposed to we're fidelis to what's happening now, but then we're also not the status quo?
We would say, as per our Hallward evidence, the idea that, oh, we can set out the one pure road to communism is bad, we would say that's like what resulted in Stalinism and violence. Instead, we need to experiment towards communism.
As long as I'm not messing up nothing.
252.
252?
Mm-hmm.
Where are we going?
It's going to be the white supremacist pick, the Nietzsche argument, and then the Zizek critique, or the Cat pick.
I heard the pick is at the top. I missed everything after that.
The white supremacist pick,
Mm-hmm.
the Nietzsche critique, and then the Zizek Leninism pick. Is everyone ready?
2AC functionally concedes the internal net benefit of the white supremacist pick and only goes for permutation arguments if they're right that not counting individuals is fundamentally violent, then one should exclude individuals who don't count others because it means that individuals such as white supremacists are necessarily violent because they do not see black individuals or individuals of color as people in the status quo. Matthews' evidence indicates that nativist tensions occur within socialist movements such as the establishment of healthcare. However, it's not a reason for why the counterbalance is not competitive. Our evidence indicates specifically this form of nativism would destroy affirmative solvency because it results in racist instantiations by which certain forms of care are roundly refused to those populations but are justified exclusively, i.e. the reason for justification for why Trump wants to build a wall is to insulate individuals from using things like social services, etc., that would be established in a communist event, etc., if they're right that it's fundamentally unequitable to not count everyone, then you should not include individuals who do not count everyone in the fidelity to the event. Secondarily, the permutation argument is not plan plus. We remove a population which is distinct from a word. Functional competition should matter, especially when the plan text doesn't specify a certain particular government action, which means that you should give the negative more ground claims for this. Additionally, we also did not say we do single payer excluding white supremacists. We say we advocate fidelity to the event of communism without counting white supremacists, which means that it accesses the fundamental text of the advocacy, which means it's intrinsic to the way in which they formulated it. Their textual competition standards are necessarily abusive because it means that affirmative can shift out of any single negative advocacy or competitive option, which destroys not only best policy option but the ability to use cost-benefit analysis to determine what is the best way by which we can formulate fidelity to the event, which is key to truth procedure and the counting of ethics. The notion that if we don't count them, that they won't count us is not an argument that they made, but secondarily, they say there would be an infinite number of picks arguments. They have not made an impact argument to picks being bad, just that it's necessarily abusive and a justification for the permutation. If they're right, it's a justification for the permutation, then we should be able to contingently concede the argument that it means that the affirmative is not competitive with not counting certain individuals, which means it violates their own ethic, and if it doesn't, it means the counterplan not only resolves the entirety of case, but also resolve the logic by which not counting individuals is violent, because white supremacists don't count black lives as mattering in the status quo, which is the conceded net benefit argument to the critique. Racism is bad because it's a form of catastrophe and violence, which will be substantiated on the K.
The Zizek K. But that's where it'll be substantiated. The Nietzsche K is where I'm going now. Nietzsche K, little or no ink on this one. The 2AC CR evidence indicates that morality is socially constructed through language via subject predicate object relationship and gives the example of lightning. Lightning is not something that strikes because it's not an agent that strikes something. Merely the act of flashing is what we attribute striking to. There's no sense of moral causality in this sense or notion by which an individual subject is made responsible for made responsible for the inaction of certain things, because it's all a dupe of language and by which we are able to falsely attribute causality. An example of this is if I drop this piece of paper, one could say that I dropped the piece of paper, one could say that gravity dropped the piece of paper. There are numerous causal metrics by which we can attribute causality to. If dropping the paper was unethical, does it mean that I'm unethical? Does it mean that gravity is unethical? There is no determinative way by which language is able to construct its internal defense against the affirmative, because it means that there is no way by which one is able to construct a truth procedure absent the arbitrary trick of language, which our evidence indicates not only is necessarily wrong, but in thus a false faith in the ability for human beings to subjectively create morality, which our evidence indicates results in things like violence, which will also be impacted out offensively, but at best this argument is terminal defense against the way in which they've used ontology to establish a sense of truth. All the case arguments about mathematics will respond to this as well, and Trent will be amazing on it because he's a PhD in math, or going to be. GJ.
2AC on the critique's entirely defense is hinged on the permutation, but it doesn't answer the link turn. The critique operates as a link turn to the entirety of the affirmative, which means the alternative solvency is extra icing on the cake, but not necessarily when the majority of reasons for why the critique turns case. Badiou's theory is utterly complicit with capitalism, devolves into a totalitarian vision of politics. There are Zizek evidence indicates is akin to the Nazi revolution for Heidegger, which is an idealistic political visions are instrumentalized to justify xenophobia under a false universality that ignores cultural, racial, and economic difference in an attempt to create a blank slate of equality in politics that is violent because it attempts to reproduce universality. If universality is necessarily good, ask yourself who in the current coordinates of power will be put in charge of the communist revolution. It will be largely white males, because that's the way that power operates in the status quo. However, their universalization effaces the way in which certain forms of exploitation happen, that power operates vis-a-vis the bourgeoisie. Pol Pot attempted to unite the working class by exterminating everyone else outside the working class, which created a universality, but that universality was also constitutive of exclusion. Zizek explicitly compares his politics to the Cultural Revolution of China in an attempt to take the state for a fact, which attenuates individuals to the state's malicious purposes and the way in which violence has been executed by state actors. Therefore, it doesn't change capitalist norms that dictate care provisions, the actuarial mechanisms which exclude research provisions for impoverished communities, or anything substantively speaking. How does fidelity to the event of communism resolve a lack of coverage for things like sickle cell anemia medications, or the pathologization of queer communities as carriers of HIV, and therefore a medical risk for treatment? Badiou's politics do not identify the proxies by which capitalist violence occurs, because it is right, because in all of its writings and arguments occur in complete abstraction, because it talks about things like the situation, fidelity to the event, but we can't describe the event because it hasn't come yet, but it's coming in the status quo. All of these are abstractions that efface a material praxis against capitalism. Nothing will ever represent the event, because therefore politics is so idealized that it proves not only substantive change, but streamlines that violence of capitalism by creating a utopian basis for politics. If the event is occurring right now, why do millions live in abject poverty around the globe? Why is there an economic incentive to produce a carceral state? Why the immolation not change structural inequalities that exist within the Middle East? Why are drug prices manipulated by market actors to deny HIV/AIDS treatment to patients? Their politics of fidelity is a politics of complacency, because it fails to enact a revolution, but instead coexists with solidarity, which does not produce the conditions of revolution, but constantly whitewashes individuals to its possibility, which turns case absent the alternative, because it means that they not only accelerate capitalism in the first place, but also occupy a form of complicity with it, which our Zizek evidence indicates is a way that by which capitalism is able to use an ideology to convince individuals that capitalism can occur in the status quo because the event is coming. Anyway, it turns case because it's fundamentally impacted the act, because it creates a form of nihilism that is induced by capitalism, which means that if we win the act is not only complicit but furthers this nihilism, it means their ideological allegiances are a reason to vote negative. It also means they perpetuates the violence of capitalism. Lada in 2009 Badiou objectively accommodates to the premises, concerns, confines of bourgeoisie democracy, where remains the hollow shell politics, which promises nothing. Capitalism, imperialism continues humming in the background, crushing lives and destroying spirits of the meek render of exploitation. The horrors continue on to cast the imperialist state as receptor and receptacle of prescriptions, and to argue for non-antagonism, to accept and reinforce the imperialist status quo, to rationalize politics that can go no farther than aiming for better terms within the imperialist citadels themselves, living intact the nexus of exploited parasitic relations, the very space. An illusory radical politics is the product of an exploitative relationship. Additionally, his understanding of historical materialism is bankrupt, because it renders his theory incapable of revolutionary action at the level of political economy, because he attempts to subtract politics from the state, which is a misguided fear in an attempt to establish a new social political reality. Zizek intended to propose that replacing purification with subtraction instead of winning. One maintains a distance to receive power. This radical conclusion is based on Badiou's rejecting the standard orthodox 20th century Marxist view, according to there is no objective agent except in social reality, which carries the possibility of emancipation. The alternative Badiou proposes is not exhausted. There is no objective social reality which is not already mediated by political subjectivity. Badiou conceives of economy as a particular spirit of positive social being, excludes that it is possible to recover the site of truth events. Economy is always a political economy and a site of political struggle. The prospect of repoliticization of economy and thus of research into the possible truth event is open up, produce exclusive opposition between the corruptive force of the economy and purity of the communist idea. As two uncompatible domains, introduces an almost Gnostic tone into his work. Badiou thus sustains the necessity of imaginary ideological illusion, an illegitimate transcendental short circuit. Badiou dismisses every history that goes beyond a particular world as an ideological fiction. There's no general theory of history, and amounts to no less than a full abandonment of the Marxist historical materialism. Badiou aims for a dialectical materialism without historical materialism. A resuscitation of the critique of political economy is sine qua non of contemporary communist politics. Is the hard real, the logical capital that's missing. The historical universe of capitalist study. Link arguments. Badiou's ethics are indifferent to atrocities of capitalism, which means there's no ethical basis to oppose it. Their evidence says this indicates, quote, consensual ethics stemming from atrocities is a contributor to the subjective resignation and acceptance of the status quo. Using atrocities to motivate action allows us to address capital. That means Badiou's politics are not only incompatible with the alternative of precluding enactment of a different form of politics. Our alternative begins with the praxis of action, which indicates that we should not wait for the event to occur, but actively be responsible for the ways in which politics perpetuates things like capitalist violence, and find a way to resist it, which includes not only community activism, but ways in which the individuals can find solidarity between one another, but find solidarity between one another within the proletariat. It doesn't give people, they don't give the people the tools necessary to resist oppression, but it's rather an ideological
ideological alignment with it. This is Lada in 2009. Badiou's theory negates the ability of people to scientifically understand reality beyond the surface level phenomena. Appears leading to a profoundly positivist, pragmatic, and empiricist philosophy, assigning knowledge to truth that works. And what appears to today's revolutionary forces of any ability to consciously influence, shape, and transform reality rather than simply attaining it spontaneously, bowing down before necessity, which means it's all a link to the permutation argument. Also, we don't need to win the alternative to win that. This is just a link turn to the entirety of the app.
Good for context?
Yep.
All right. Where does the Zizek card make any of these arguments about how Badiou's methodology is exclusive to like racialized dimensions of capitalism?
Yeah, our evidence indicates that his idealism means that he doesn't address the ways in which capitalism kind of creates violence, but also how history has made certain forms of violence contingent upon things like imperialism, which is why our evidence indicates that he, quote, continues the smooth streamlining of capitalist imperialism.
Okay, so I think I have that gets me to my next question then, because the Zizek card says, quote, what Badiou seems to lack is a meta theory of history. What is the proper meta theory of history?
Historical materialism.
What is historical materialism?
The documentation historically of the dialectical antagonism between the bourgeoisie and the proletariat throughout human history.
Okay, how does that get operationalized? Like,
how does that get operationalized?
How does the bourgeoisie?
By movements examining the ways in which the bourgeoisie has consistently exploited the proletariat and creating an ethical praxis against that exploitation. We don't think the app does that because it just remains, it's just fidelis to the idea of communism, but doesn't place a burden on individuals to enact those forms of politics.
I'm a little confused by one thing you said, right? It's about how the bourgeoisie constructs ethics to be anti-proletarian. How are we not a hedge back against that?
How? Because our evidence indicates that fidelity is a form of accommodation. It indicates Badiou objectively accommodates to the premises, constraints, and confines of bourgeoisie democracy, which our evidence indicates what remains is just a hollow shell of politics.
There's one other thing I want to ask about the Zizek evidence. It says, quote, Badiou relegated capitalism to a naturalized background of our historical constellation, capitalism as worldless. How does he do that?
How does he do that? So all of the arguments I make in the overview where I'm like, you say the event's coming, you say this thing like immolation was, a revolutionary event. Why is there massive structural inequality that exists in the Middle East? Why are drug executives manipulating prices in the market in ways that deny AIDS treatments to patients?
All of inequality. How is that standard not also
It's not just a standard for solvency, it's a standard for how we should engage in revolutionary praxis. Our evidence indicates that it's not that you should need to solve all of that, but the belief that the event could come in that time, or that fidelity to it magically fixes the fact that drug executives manipulate prices, or that there are structural realities that impede individuals' ability to recognize things like communism or have that event occur. It's not only is it unrealistic, but it's a fantasy. And to believe in that fantasy is something that capitalism wants because it makes individuals complacent to it.
Okay, let's go to the Nietzsche argument real quick, right? So you said that there is no possible truth procedure because morality is constructed via language.
Yeah.
Could you explain a little bit more? I'm confused
So,
about the moral causality.
Yeah. So I guess I mean the example of this was like me dropping the piece of paper. Like, did I drop the piece of paper? Did gravity cause the paper to drop? Were there conditions by which the paper existed that allowed it to be dropped? Our argument is that causality is so complex that language cannot even begin to attribute morality to it.
This is going to be case.
You did this to me once.
Is there a
I
document?
think like
Yeah.
five off, and there's like this adds and a K and some T, and I was like, wow, I'm having an actual policy debate. Went down to K and case in the block. I was like, you tricked me.
Yeah, sure.
2 seconds. It's in the TUNC document. Just this guy.
Can I just read off that?
Yeah. Just say
Yeah, so it's going to be the K first. Which one?
G-check.
It'll be on G-check first. Sorry. All good to go? And this card's in the 2NC doc.
Okay, Zizek and then the case?
Yeah, G-check did the case. The card's in the 2NC doc, the first card I'm going to read.
That was like definitionally prepping, so be careful.
Okay,
Oh,
yeah, we
yeah,
can
sorry.
take like
Yeah, we'll
5
take that.
seconds for that.
Yeah.
5.
No, we.
I don't know.
It was 2, let's agree on 5. Because I was like, where's the
Okay.
card? It's in the doc, it's right there. Yeah, we're gonna read that one, cool. So let's call it 5.
247.
That's math. We can do that.
Uh,
Well, I can't.
Only in ethical politics that refuse to negotiate with the rules and logic of the established order can break out of that order. Their perm is a refusal to confront the terrifying real of radical ethics, which means it can't solve only a militant commitment to an ethical political universe can alter the very coordinates of the situation that's daily in for today's left to articulate modern man to the face of virtually unlimited capitalism. Confrontation with the obscenities of abundant capitalism requires transformation of the ethico-political imagination. It is no longer a question of developing ethical guidelines within the existing political frameworks, developing a politicization of ethics. Starting point here is an insistence on the unconditional autonomy of the subject. An ethics that real does not simply defer to the impossible. Such an ethics is one that fully accepts contingency, but which is nonetheless prepared to risk the impossible in the sense of breaking out of standardized positions. We cannot rely on any form of symbolic other that would endorse our decisions and actions, market and actions onto case. We have a right to multiple propositional attacks against the affix. Then subpoint A, notice how must the 2AC hinges on their explanation of a meta-level analysis that proves our argument. The app is metaphysics first, even if they claim that their ethics come first. Their ethics are substantiated by the economy of inclusion and exclusion, which is their metaphysical claim. Literally, the 2AC starts being with a capital B. This is inherently a metaphysical claim. They should have conceded subpoint B, but use analytic fusion with the continental philosophy means his notions that ethics are intrinsically tied to his attempts to refashion Platonic ideals. Deny this is like saying that we can have their ethics without the app. It is proof of their infidelity. Vote negative presumption extends subpoint B. This is now a logic game. Either A, the app itself is an event that breaks the situation of debate. Only we can be fidelis to that, so vote neg. Or B, we get multiple contradictions to prove the app wrong. Hypotesting is key for negative attacks against metaphysical proposals. That's most real world, but Badiou has to defend himself against multiple attacks and conferences. Shifting out of Badou's event theory is a voter for being unfair. It creates an off-ground advantage because it's a moving target. They don't have to defend elements that we can research. Also, it's unethical to vote neg. The only argument that they have there is that the ethics are separate from this, but Proposition 2 is going to answer this. The Paquette evidence says that Badiou doesn't include non-European scholarship. We don't need to impact this. We don't need to impact this out very well because this can mean it's a presumption argument. How can you include people without including their scholarship? That proves that the process of the event is inherently violent because you can become one with the universal set so long as you leave your ideas at the door. This is also articulated on the white supremacist pick. We can include white supremacists in the event. We can accept their ideas, but that's not the same as including their scholarship with the idea, decolonial scholarship with the idea of the event. The ideas and epistemologies of people cannot be separated from people themselves. Otherwise, this process becomes violent and nobly articulates negative identity, prevents emancipation. That's Paquette in 17, but in negative conception of identity. Genus argues that the positive conceptions of identity are important for the formulation of collective memory, and a collective memory is a source of heritage and even resistance and empowerment. I hold up Badou's politics of difference has further implications, namely it serves to demarcate what counts as politically efficacious to bringing about emancipation. Thus, I propose that drawing a correlation between his projection of identity and his politics of difference and his projection of certain historical movements as political or emancipatory serves to illustrate the limitation of a project for understanding understanding race. The only argument here is about colonialism and being able to count the people. Already answered that above. Extend Proposition 3. There is a fatal flaw in their ontology. Badou's basis for ontology is mathematics of choice, means we can't draw any meaningful conclusions from it. Cadelity completeness theorem means that there is a choice of axioms based on the ability of some system to be logically consistent. Yes, that means there exists competing logical system, but that does not negate the importance of the argument. The difference between including and not excluding the existence of set first is an important question. It's not what Cadelity and completeness theory is about. I'll explain first order logic here. First order logic was meant to explain that things exist. When we talk about cats, we can say that the universal set of the cat exists. We can say that the elements of the cat come from the elements of flesh, but to say that the cat comes from nothing is nonsensical, which is exactly why their metaphysics don't make sense, which is why we can substantiate arguments like it doesn't make sense to include people without including their ideas, and why it's bad to include people like white supremacists. The existence of the empty set is presented as an axiom for the purposes of technical writing by some mathematicians because they aren't drawing conclusions about ontology from it. But it's not a matter of necessity. I'll explain the math here. We can freely assume for first order logic that there exists from some non-empty set X explained above. Then using the axiom of separation, we can specify that the condition that Y is not equal to Y implies that Y is an X. Obviously, there's no instance where Y is not equal to Y. Hence, we have yielded the empty set. That means the basic assumption of their ontology, i.e., that we construct something from nothing as a matter of choice. The reason this choice matters is because you literally build a schema of normalcy based around this notion of sameness, which is why you can justify the exclusion of non-European ideas. This is terminal defense because this Badou's argument is literally the equivalent of writing a paper in English and concluding that writing in English is an ontological schema of normalcy. This is literally what allows colonial violence to happen. Extend Proposition 4. Badou's ethics are bad. Subpoint A. Extend Rothberg. Badou's universality ignores cultural difference, which makes the truth a question of theory and accessible for criticism of imperialism and capitalism. It means their affirmative failed to address localized violence and regimes of erasure. So point B, extend McKinsey, don't be fooled. This is how fascism works. Yay, everyone is equal except for those that don't get it. See, the problem with Badiou is he desperately wants to object to political events, but to maintain normative Nazis bound. However, Badiou holds two contradictory statements are true. One, humans equally have the unique ability to think, and two, politically, equality is not what we should desire. They read the end of the McKinsey argument to say that this is not an event, but you should just see this as that there should be a double bind here. Either nothing can possibly be an event because there is no way to have the inclusion of everybody, or there is the possibility of the event and they are not it, which means that you vote negative on presumption. Number one is, yeah, sure. Badiou is a jackass per excellence. His politics justify atrocious violence at Zizek. And two, do not Badiou's own examples display the limits of the logic. Yes, hatred for the enemy, intolerance, false wisdom, and so on. We should respect a certain limit of the others. Radical otherness, totalitarianism, with its billions of victims, show the ultimate outcome in the following. To the end, which appears to be a subjectively just action, Badiou ended up directly supporting communist terror. This is precisely the line of reasoning we should reject. Should we show respect for the abyss of the radical otherness of Hitler's personality beneath all his evil acts out of our very love for humanity? We should fight them in an absolute ruthlessness and disrespectful way. And extend Proposition 5. Capitalism breaks your universality and defeats the event. Their only argument here is that logic can't, if they win their logic, that means they can overcome capitalism. If we win any of our claims that their metaphysics are bad, means that they don't solve it.
We have 6:40 starting now.
See, this debate was easier to have when Scoob was around. Because he had no idea what he was talking about.
Scoot almost failed math safari. Which the class consisted of like going outside and counting things.
Thanks. What's Scoob up to these days?
Playing Skyrim and living with his girlfriend, and he got expelled, so he's not. Yeah. Exactly.
Did he move back to Arizona?
No. He's still living in Spokane. I think he's trying to enroll in Spokane Community College, but you really never know with him. So
Yeah, I guess so.
I think most likely likely is a tenuous word with him, but I think probably what's gonna happen is like he will.
One of the NDT because he was taking a quiz.
No, no homework. I forgot I had a stats one.
Sad.
Very sad.
Case. Pick. Zizek. Nietzsche. Framework. Sorry. It's like a
Little jig.
1 AR thing. All right.
I'm not ready.
Did you say you weren't ready?
No, I'm not. Listo.
Our ethics is good, helps us figure out or aids us in ambiguous situations by saying we should count everyone. Bad ethical system count defeating evil is a heroic act. For example, do single payer because rich people shouldn't be on top. That is a fantasy. We say we should truly mourn the damage done to them because they truly do have enough personhood to matter. Bad ethics say we shouldn't have to feel bad about making tough decisions. We say this shouldn't be easy. Justice is not not about balance or fairness. It's about deserves, and everyone deserves everything. Now, the first argument is about the first argument is the breaking the situation, infidelity and breaking the situation. But I think that the framing page indicates that we've actually done the same. We can see the offense of the betrayal argument, which is the reason why they should lose debate. I'll get to that on the page itself. And I think that the 2AC did a pretty good job explaining that the ethics of choosing fidelity to communism. Now, communism is the third wave of communism. I'll talk a little bit about that on the Zizek page. But I think that the way they think that the communism is happening right now. I think that instead our Daniel stuff indicates that our rhetorical act is on to express instead of the moving target. I mean, we're not a moving target. We're fidelity to the event. We're defending metaphysics. We're defending the metaphysics anyway. Now, the colonialism argument being but must by definition be general and universal because the only thing that accounts for an infinite set of different sets are Badu evidence and a Harvard evidence. The top of the 2AC explained that the work of philosophy to theorize the multiple of the new. The colonial philosophies, they say we align our explanations of how status quo power structures are being, which are philosophies of the one and not of the many. We have a competing theory of how this happens, which is that those power structures are structures of counting, not discipline, which means the affirmative solves the eventual rupture of those counting structures. They don't have a competing theory of how this happens, which means you should equal to the affirmative. It's not a rejection of identity to become what you are. Start at the bottom of the view evidence indicates that you can't have your scholarship. We're just saying that scholarship is not ontological. Everyone's scholarship cannot be correct, which means that they, at the very least, are also an exclusion of our scholarship, which is a reason they should lose in the same fucking absurd reasons, voting issues. Now, the mathematical argument, they have not proven the ethics derived from metaphysics, which is the burden outlined by the 2AC. We count more people. We have a phenomenological proof of our ethics that they have not contested. That was the 2AC cross-section. Should not have to reinvent the wheel. The only argument is that Badu has made a choice, and until they can tell you why the choice he's made is necessarily a bad one or any different from the choices that other mathematicians make, then this shit is not offense. Two arguments. One is Gödel. They haven't just proven the incompleteness theory, which is it indicates that there's no self-consistent set of axioms that can describe all of mathematics. That means that every mathematician must always make a choice to which axioms to begin with. That non-unique to the argument, but do choose to begin with the empty set because they make some arguments about this has bad ontological consequences about cat flush. But the only thing is this example. The one takeaway from the empty set is that hidden in the empty set is all the counting numbers. I would do the proof, but it takes too long. That's the ontological question of surreal numbers. The uncounted are always imminent to the situation. The proletariat is here and exists, but it's uncounted. That counting more, i.e., the event that ruptures the counting is the good, is an independent reason to buy our ontology. Two is the ontological claims are unwarranted by their evidence. Two, at the very least, this is defensive. We can still be ethical. There's literally no impact to this on the ethics. So as long as you believe in ethical orientation towards counting more, you would affirm it. And then the McKenzie stuff, we read a card from their own author, which actually concludes the opposite. It says, quote, Badu distinguishes student revolutionary events such as Nazism from real events because Nazism could not be claimed equally by all. This is an argument that was in the card that they literally just not respond to. Yes, we do. The universalized stuff is above. We'd say that Nazism is bad. Hallward has already critique of this. There's no impact to this. The double mind at the very bottom makes no sense. Yes, we do include everyone in communism. That was above. The other side of the page has nothing on it. What was the last thing? Oh, they said we can't solve communism. I think that it's not a question of solving all of capitalist domination, but rather taking an ethical orientation towards those things in the first place. The white supremacists pick. They absolutely cannot go for this fucking nonsense. The top of my speech says we should not feel good about ambiguous decisions. We have impact from the net benefit by saying that these people are evil is the logic of those people themselves. Yes, it's unethical to count everyone, which is why we should count them because it's ethical. We should count unethical people because they are people. At worst, the ethically affirmative solves by changing ontology and counting in general makes it impossible for the alt-right to do any of that stuff because the alt-right are just because they're bad. We should use the logic of the alt-right just deciding that we don't like a group of people so they don't get to come in sounds pretty fucking suspicious and actually like the logic of the alt-right itself. Instead, we should reject that logic at that level. They say, yeah, I'm just gonna extend Perm do the counterclaim because they didn't respond to that. They only responded to Perm do both. I think that the functional, like we say functional and textual competition is necessary, they say functional is necessary. They didn't answer the textual stuff, so we get Perm to the counterclaim. Juche. They didn't answer Perm to the alternative, which escapes all this stuff. Their historical materialism is bad. We are a re-articulation of historical materialism that allows them to understand how the material conditions are constructed. That's a mathematical debate. The way that these types of material come into being determines the bourgeois power versus proletarian, which is divided the affirmative. At the very least, solves the impact of this because the impact is capitalism. I think that the way that we have articulated communism is a way to get away from these stuff. That the power relations stuff, the power relations stuff answers the universality argument. We're not an abstraction. We definitely do have historical examples. Bouzizi, it did actually change its structure and systems of power in Tunisia, specific to Tunisia. But I think that the betrayal argument is a reason why it's not happening in the sense quo. Now, the third wave of communism is experimental. The coming anyway argument is not a reason why we should not have faith. And if they failed fundamentally respond to the affirmative, our shit is what gives it on to get question. We need to actually push that forward. That's the utopia. We say utopia is actually good because we need something to strive for and motivate our actual actions. The permutation of the alternative says that we are fundamentally already an answer to the communism. We do refuse to negotiate with ethical, which means we are always already with the bottom of the G6 chapter talking about the fidelity is actually an action. That's ridiculous. Evidence and ethics about theology is bad because you by positing the evil first and making arguments about atrocities and saying that evil must be stopped. That is good. Denying the possibility of it could usher in a society based purely around the principles of good, such as communism. Locke says that its status quo makes all forms of politics fucking reactionary, which means we can't motivate our stuff. Go to Nietzsche. We are saying that morality is not a set of rules. We're saying it's an ethos. It is a process. It is a position that you've chosen to take, which means that all of the arguments about causality are completely not responsive to the affirmative. Instead of saying that the actions that I take are ethical because they cause particular things, instead we're saying the ethical actions are ethical because they're ethical, because they're positions that we've chosen to take because they count more. We're not consequentialists. We definitely do. We definitely also do have good effects because we have faith in it. That's the easy example that I gave. What does this reveal? How does this interact with the other pages? They seem to care about what we actually cause them on the G-check page, which indicates that this is not an argument of the framework stuff. I'm going to extend betrayal, and they betrays the resolution. This means upholding the status quo at all costs. Not only does this kill creativity, but the slippery slope to fashion. That is the third temptation of evil, is perversion of fidelity. The reason they should lose the debate.
240.
states counterclaim against stuff.
We've been having policy debates like nobody's business.
50 events are better than one. That makes me really mad.
Wow, I mean, I guess with math that is just, 50 is bigger than one.
Okay,
That might just be true.
where are we going?
Okay. Order is going to be framework, the Zizek critique, and then case. I might go to Nietzsche at that time, but
You might go to
let's
the
not. I might go to the Nietzsche flow at the end, but yeah.
Okay, so framework, Zizek, Nietzsche, maybe.
Hmm. Okay. Framework argument, no terminal impact of betraying the resolution. All of these arguments are dependent upon winning. The produced ethics are necessarily true, which means that if we win our case arguments and the link and the thesis of the link arguments on the case disproves the basis by which betrayal is necessarily unethical, because it disproves the basis by which his ethics are necessarily not only true but should be adhered to. Secondarily, this argument also links to all of their arguments about why identifying a bad thing to produce a good is necessarily violent, because it means that there's no ethics of the good that can be used to justify things like communism, because the notion of betrayal as being bad necessarily posits that something is bad in order to generate a good in the first place, which links to all of their arguments. Oh, really quickly, the white supremacist pick. My apologies. White supremacist pick, we're not going for it. We'll concede permutation due to the counterplan. I made an explicit argument in the 2NC that was conceded, which was a double-bind argument about if the permutation due to the counterplan is correct, then it means that it is a way in which the affirmative can be implemented, which means that it is a double turn in terms of their textual competition, functional competition arguments, because they've said that because the permutation due to the counterplan says that the counterplan and the plan can be functionally indistinct from one another in terms of implementation. If that is necessarily true, then it links to all of their arguments that they made about why the counterplan doesn't count all individuals, which means that they've linked to themselves, because a way in which the app could be implemented is one that does not count all individuals, means their ethic not only is not unconditional, but because it's conditional, but it also means that their ethic is predicated off of not counting, which means it's mutually contradictory, because they made a double turn argument on this entirety on this flow, which links to themselves. This argument was conceded in the 2NC, which means that you should be very tenuous when allowing new 2AR responses to it. Now onto the K. On the K, links to the critique should be read on cases independent offense are implicated on every single flow of the debate, because they prove that produced theories not only fails to challenge capitalism, but is in fact a ruse of capitalist ideology that allows for a false augury identification with social movements that doesn't do anything to seize the means of production or substantively change politics. Fidelity should be the question at the end of this debate. You should ask yourself what fidelity entails, whether or not it conforms to capitalism or materially resists it. What does a process of fidelity do to improve the lives of those that are systematically oppressed by capitalism in an unequal and imperialist machine of slaughter? A lot of evidence indicates that Padue's vision is nothing but a radical democracy which treats all individuals as equals, which faces the asymmetric distribution of things like economic power as well as racial and imperialist power dynamics that exist within the United States, which means it's a link turn to all of their arguments, because if they re-ingrain capitalism, the reason for why Badiou says communism is good is because capitalism is bad, because it produces nihilism, which means that there's no ethics, which means it turns all of their arguments about ethics if they re-ingrain communism, because it means that their app it re-engages capitalism, because it means that not only is their app complicit within capitalism, but it means that it allows capitalism to smoothly function, which is a form of passive nihilism, because it means fidelity will always be fidelity to an event that will never occur, rather than one that seizes the means of production through a Leninist notion of resolution. Our evidence indicates specifically that this is a politics and cultural revolution that attempts to take the state for a fact, which attenuates individuals to its malicious purposes, because it doesn't change the ways in which certain forms of care provision are unequally distributed in the status quo. I gave multiple conceded examples of the way in which queer communities were denied medical treatment on the basis that there were risks for spreading their disease, that could have a large scale economic impacts on the population, the pathologization and removal of sickle cell anemia coverage treatment for black communities, because it was believed that they did not have insurance coverage, etc. All of these political inequalities are failed to be identified by the negative, but not identified by the negative, but also are passively scathed over in a politics of absolute universalism. Our evidence indicates that this is something that allows for asymmetric power distributions to go unchallenged in the status quo. They say that they're a re-articulation of historical materialism. All of their arguments are fundamentally reasons for why they solve the alternative, or are capable of doing some sort of alternative iteration. You can kick the alternative if it is necessary, because all of our link arguments are functionally straight turns to the ability of the affirmative to not only be able to resolve their ethics, but their complicity within the system of capitalism. A lot of evidence indicates that it is a form of accommodation, that capitalist imperialism continues humming in the background, crushing lives and destroying spirits in the meat grinder of exploitation. We've also posited a competing mode of ethics to frame the impact debate as well. Our daily evidence indicates that you should use atrocity as a motivation for for trying to make the world a better place, that the notion that we should only focus on the good traits off with our ability to analyze how certain forms of extreme oppression and violence have shaped history and shaped the unequal distribution of power. The daily evidence indicates that it's an ethical political responsibility to resist the guidelines of the affirmative in order to develop a politicization of ethics that is a starting point question, because it starts from the individual autonomy of the subject, the ability for the subject to enact change and participate within it in society, rather than to just be fidelis to change that's already happening in the status quo, which is why our alternative is capable of resolving the majority of the app. There's also a second link argument about abstraction that that's not answered as well. Our evidence indicates that Badou's theory of events can be fungibly reappropriated by capitalism because it lacked in essential content. Their evidence indicates this as well. This is a quote from the 1NC. An event has no objective or verifiable content. Its happening cannot be proved, only affirmed and proclaimed. There is no objective content to their event. The second argument about the nihilism debate as well is about how consensual ethics are things that deny our ability to find resistance to atrocities. We pulled another line from their evidence, and we're the only ones doing evidence-based comparison in this debate as well. They say that ethics of evil is necessarily bad because atrocities deny the principles of good, which was answered above the third wave experimental ontic expression arguments. None of these arguments are justifications for why they should get the permutation, because the permutation still relies on a fidelity that denies the ability for action to occur, and if it doesn't, then it means you can kick the alternative case. Second proposition isn't dealt with properly. They reduce the debate down to counting, but this argument is about the way in which we count. Paquette does advance a competing theory about the way that we count. There is a positive conception, negative conception of identity. Badou uses negative concepts of identity to separate people from their identities, which is an inherently violent process of exclusion that denies the way in which imperialism and capitalism are implicated in the way in which individual ideologies and individual subjectivities are formed throughout the alternative or through the affirmative, which means that they are not able to challenge the ways in which it occurs, which means Badou's metaphysics are equivalent to saying a cat comes from nowhere in the first place, but denies the properties that determine what makes a cat in the first place. It also denies the properties of what makes a racist, what makes a capitalist, etc., and that is why it's constitutively violent.
We have 3:48. Starting now.
Okay. The order will be case. Then we'll click on the pick. Then decay, and then the framework. Is anyone not ready? Let's get going.
Two reasons to vote F. One, they have conceded that this is a debate about competing ethical models first, which is an easy way for you to decide this round because one, they haven't provided you an alternate form of doing ethics that you can hang your hat on that is well justified besides this daily evidence, and second, any piece of offense we have against their ethics is enough to vote F to reject them. They have conceded that you consider ethics as an ethos, i.e. you can't separate different flows or different arguments they've made because they've chosen to take a position in this debate. If you consider it as an ethos, then any singular piece of offense against their ethical method is enough for you to reject them as a team. The second reason is that the permutation resolves all of the permutation of the arguments we're making on the K page resolves all of the links. They don't get to kick the you shouldn't kick the alt for them because you should consider them an ethos. Once they have made a position, they have to be stuck to it. Anything else is unethical because it allows them to shift their positions and make it so that we never have any sort of ethical ground to maintain ourselves on. The affirmative is calling for fidelity to the event of communism. We would say that this is necessarily good because it counts more people within the state of the situation. We say that violence and exclusion happens because some people are counted, i.e. the bourgeoisie, and some people are uncounted, the proletarians. We would say that the affirmative fidelity to the event is the only thing that they can smash that. They've conceded the Badu 8 evidence, which indicates that the communist horizon is happening right now, and we need to experiment within that horizon for there to be solvency. Also, the Daniel evidence, which indicates that rhetorical actions in nominating and proclaiming the event is necessary for it to become universally important. That's a reason we're not going to be abstraction, but I'll get to that on the K page. The only arguments they made on the colonialism argument. They have conceded a bunch of 1AR arguments. First, they say first, negative identity is good. Being must by definition be so because that's the only thing that accounts for an infinite set of differences and allows people to actually be different from each other. Either or otherwise, it's just a philosophy of the one and not of the many. They don't have an alternative theory of how it's possible for colonialism to happen, so you default to counting. Badu and Hallward are especially good in this question, and they didn't answer them. Hallward says that negative identity accounts for infinity of phenomenological differences and change, which was the top of the 2AC. The Badu evidence says that imminent development within a new situation become what you are. The political consequence of this axiom will work to consolidate what is universal identities. This means that including people doesn't mean including their scholarship. There would be no scholarship, no dialogue otherwise, because everyone would be right. Syndrome from The Incredibles is right. If everyone is right, then nobody will ever be right, and there's no internal link to this cat flesh nonsense. They didn't answer the Gödel's incompleteness theorem argument, which says that from within the set of nothing, there is immanent within nothing is all of the things. Everything that exists is always immanent. The proletarian are uncounted, but they are immanent within the situation, which means that we can begin from nothing and still get to something because these are immanent. The event is what allows us to get to that something. Let's go to the pick on the ethics is a position you've chosen to take. The 1AR says the logic of the pick is the logic of the alt-right, refusing to count as a terrible ethic and its impact on ethical. Permanent the counterplan, not a double term. The 1AR articulation of the impact term dovetails with the ethos argument, says that an action of the counterplan is not textually competitive with the action of the app, but also that the position of the counterplan is bad. The theory arguments say that this is what's justified when you pick out shit like this, which is why the pick is nonsense. It's time to stop talking about it. Let's go to the critical page. They say that the links are independent offense and we don't do anything, but they ask what does fidelity entail? We say that fidelity entails communism. That is a world in which the proletarian are no longer exploited, no longer have their material advantages taken away from them. We say that things actually do become material. They have not answered the example of the Daniels evidence, which indicates that within Tunisia, Muhammad Bouazizi's event and the people that had fidelity to the event or that were actually able to create better materials conditions in Tunisia, the overthrow of the dictator Ben Ali and the coming to be of a new social democratic party in Tunisia indicates that there is actual material changes that come about as fidelity to the event. We say that we improve lives in two ways. One, tying yourself to movements like the affirmative allows you to become an immortal subject, and key to that means that even after your biological death, you still have made a change in the world. That means that even if we don't get rid of all sorts of capitalism, we say that the move towards stopping it is the only ethical action. Second, it is a literal movement. It is a literal material change. The Daniels evidence that they have conceded that our rhetoric is an object excrescence in the world, which means that we do tackle the material conditions that his theory talks about. They say that we face distribution of bad things, and that's a link term because we don't get ethics and ethics, but we have a better theory for how that distribution comes about in the first place. This is a counting argument. This is something that he said very clearly in Crossix, that the way the bourgeois is able to operationalize its violence and exclusion of people is because they are able to construct ethics which excludes the proletarian. We would say that as long as we are in ethics, that is counting everyone, and moves who are counting more, we're able to solve it. We would say that distribution comes about because the bourgeoisie count more than the proletarian. The proletarians count less. We would say that that's how those material conditions come about. They say that the alternative is Leninism, but Leninism is old and already counted with the situation. Our visual aid evidence indicates that was the second wave of the communist hypothesis, which means the alternative has a terminal solvency deficit. They have not answered the Badu card at all. Let's go to the alternative. It resolves all of the links. We are already always a move against capitalism that the Zizek evidence is talking about. We're working against it to destroy the distributions of power. We are always going to be looking at history and the distributions of wealth because that is operationalized by the counting operation. This resolves all the links. And remember, they don't get to kick out. You shouldn't kick the alternative for them because of this ethos argument, which goes cold conceded. They make a few link arguments. The first one is the accommodation politics, that we end up accommodating everyone. This was partially answered on the pick above, but also we are not saying that, like, the ethics argument we made above. We say that the bourgeoisie are still people when we take away their wealth and we redistribute it. We're not saying that they shouldn't be included in that sort of thing. That's the reason why their negative ethics is bad. That's the ethics of ideology, which is a top-down imposition of universal ethical rules, such as the proclamation of a certain human right. They say that we are obstruction, but all the material analysis I did above answers that. They say the third wave explanation is not enough for the perm, but yes, it is. It literally talks about things like calling for the breakdown of walls within society, calling for the end of police raids. These are material things that Badu ties himself to, which prove that we are a better form of historical material analysis. Vote app.
Great.